Hi, everyone. I'm Elaine Quijano. President Trump is spending Thanksgiving in Florida. But back in Washington, there is a growing list of issues setting the stage for a potential showdown between all three branches of government. Lawmakers are slamming the president after he said he's standing by Saudi Arabia. Despite two U.S. officials telling CBS News the CIA believes the country's crown prince, Mohammed bin Salman, ordered journalist Jamal Khashoggi's killing. Republican Senator Bob Corker, outgoing chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, criticized the White House's response.
It is a delicate situation when we have a long-term ally that we've had for decades, but we have a crown prince that I believe directed the killing of a journalist. And the language that was used, it was as if they were writing a press release for Saudi Arabia, not for the United States.
There are also new developments in the Mueller investigation. The president's lawyers said he submitted answers to written questions from the special counsel's office. This comes as President Trump says he is unlikely to sit down for an interview with Mueller. And then there's the migrant caravan, which continues to approach the U.S. border. More than 5,000 U.S. troops are positioned at the border to stop them. And there are new questions about how long they will stay there. A federal judge dealt a blow to the White House earlier this week, ruling against the administration's plan to deny asylum to immigrants who crossed the border illegally. That led to this response from President Trump.
Every case that gets filed in the Ninth Circuit, we get beaten, and then we end up having to go to the Supreme Court, like the travel ban, and we won. The Ninth Circuit, we're going to have to look at that. This was an Obama judge, and I'll tell you what. It's not going to happen like this anymore. It's a disgrace. In my opinion, it's a disgrace what happens with the Ninth Circuit. We will win that case in the Supreme Court of the United States.
The president's comments drew criticism from Supreme Court Chief Justice John Roberts, who told the Associated Press, quote, "We do not have Obama judges or Trump judges, Bush judges or Clinton judges. What we have is an extraordinary group of dedicated judges doing their level best to do equal right to those appearing before them. That independent judiciary is something we should all be thankful for." President Trump responded to Chief Justice Roberts on Twitter, saying in part, quote, "Sorry, Chief Justice John Roberts, but you do indeed have Obama judges, and they have a much different point of view than the people who are charged with the safety of our country." Joining me now, Paula Reid, Nancy Cook, and Julia Manchester. Paula is a CBS News Washington correspondent. Nancy is a White House reporter for Politico, and Julia is a reporter for The Hill. Ladies, welcome to you all. These are remarkable times, to say the least. And Paula, I want to start with you. How significant is it to have a sitting Supreme Court justice, let alone a Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, publicly rebuke the President of the United States?
Oh, it's very significant. This is an unusual interaction between the White House and the judiciary, but also for this Chief Justice, Chief Justice John Roberts. We rarely hear from him publicly. He makes speeches, but he certainly doesn't opine on things going on. And the president has relentlessly been criticizing the federal judiciary. He did that throughout his campaign. And since many of his policies have been challenged, especially in the Ninth Circuit, he has been very critical of that circuit of federal judges. He's even been critical of Roberts himself. On the campaign trail, you may remember he called him a disaster for his vote on the Affordable Health Care Act. So here you have Roberts kind of pushing back at a time that a lot of people are concerned about the image of the judiciary, especially the Supreme Court, as being an impartial body following the contentious confirmation hearing of now Justice Kavanaugh.
Well, Nancy, what more do we know about how the White House is going to respond specifically to this decision from the Ninth Circuit Court?
Well, I think that we're seeing how the White House is going to respond. The president was responding personally on Twitter. He's trying to politicize the justices and judges and sort of categorize everyone into right versus left, which sort of calls into question the independence of the judiciary system and allows him to undermine decisions he doesn't like. And so I feel like the president is responding directly. And this is why the White House has put such stock in their Supreme Court picks, because all of these decisions, a lot of them are ending up in the Supreme Court, as Trump himself said, and that's why it's so important to them to have a court that tilts right.
Yeah, I can only imagine what must go through the mind of, say, Justice Kavanaugh, Paula, at a time like this when you're watching this remarkable interaction taking place.
Absolutely. For all the justices, this is unprecedented. But for Kavanaugh, I'm sure in many ways this is such a personal process that he went through. It's personal for his family. There were accusers who certainly seemed viable, legitimate, and then there were other ones who have now recanted. So I'm sure he has a lot of emotions about the entire state of play.
Julia, let's turn to another issue. So stopping the migrant caravan was, of course, a signature issue of the president's on the campaign trail during the midterm elections. He's scheduled to visit Mississippi next week to campaign for Senator Cindy Hyde-Smith. What do you think we'll hear from the president on this issue? Because it's been some time before we've actually heard him raise it publicly.
Right. I think the president is going to continue campaigning on this issue. You know, the migrant caravan hasn't gone away. It's still continuing to move towards the United States. And I think President Trump will still use that issue to really drum up a lot of Republican support. You know, during the Kavanaugh hearing, I think a lot of politicos were saying, oh, you know, this hearing is what's going to get Republicans really amped up before the election. However, I think immigration has really taken that role, whereas Democrats have looked to issues such as health care. So I think President Trump will definitely dig in his heels on this issue.
And, you know, you still have more than 5,000 troops at the border right now. I mean, what more do we know about what exactly they're going to be doing there, how long they're going to be there, and, you know, what exactly the White House is looking for them to do next? Paula.
Well,
go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, yes. Well, it seems like they're going to be stationed there for a while. We're seeing some officials go down and visit there. However, I think it's a bit unclear at this point. You know, we're seeing, you know, President Trump's rhetoric on, you know, those seeking on his asylum statements and such. But, you know, yeah, it's a little unclear to see what they're doing because he's sending combat troops down there. However, you know, it's unclear how this is all going to play out. We've seen some headlines about skirmishes down there, but in general, you know, it's not as if a large, you know, I guess, violent group is coming across.
Nancy, what are you hearing about this?
Well, I think that we've seen the Pentagon really sort of walk Politico reported the other day that the troops were going to start coming home right after Thanksgiving. The Pentagon then walked that back. Now Secretary Mattis is saying some of them could come home by Christmas. And so we've seen a lot of indecision within the administration about what it would look like. Just within the last few minutes, one of the White House press secretaries, Hogan Gidley, put out a statement basically saying that the White House had also authorized these troops to be able to use force if people tried to come over the border illegally. And so the White House, although it sort of dropped the caravan message in the interim between the midterm and now, I think that we're starting to see it heat up a little bit as a political issue just because the troops are stationed there and there's some contention around whether or not they need to be there.
Yeah, I remember President Trump on the campaign trail before midterms talking about the idea that troops should treat the migrants who were throwing rocks as if they had firearms, essentially, and that was certainly something that got a lot of attention. Let's turn to another issue here. A number of lawmakers on both sides of the aisle are criticizing the president for his decision to stand by Saudi Arabia after assessments from the CIA said Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman ordered the killing of journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Julia, what action might we see from lawmakers in response?
Well, we're seeing a lot of Republican lawmakers really push back against the president. I think you're going to see potential calls for more sanctions against Saudi Arabia, for more of action on this issue. But, you know, it is remarkable to see the president really almost side with Saudi Arabia this publicly on this issue. However, it does, you know, I think supporters of the president would say this is almost a continuation of U.S. foreign policy. You know, we can go back as far as 9/11 and see that the U.S. has still continued to do business and relations with Saudi Arabia, even when they've been involved in nefarious activities. So, you know, I think you're going to see a lot of lawmakers pushing back against the president's response. But, you know, it'll be interesting to see if there's any more information that comes from the CIA or the intelligence community about what happened to Khashoggi and the Crown Prince's involvement in it.
I do want to ask Julia about one particular critic who was especially vocal about this, Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard, a Democrat. She was pretty direct, I think it's fair to say, in her response to the president. However, some would say that she's a bit of a flawed messenger, considering her interactions with the al-Assad regime in Syria.
Right, and that's very interesting when you look at, I guess, the geopolitics over there. You know, you see the Trump administration supporting a majority Sunni nation, and Tulsi Gabbard has essentially supported Bashar al-Assad, who is Shia. So clearly they are opposing Saudi Arabia and Syria, you would say, are on opposing sides of that issue. But yeah, a lot of critics, you know, including Meghan McCain, really went after Tulsi Gabbard for her rhetoric on that, due to the fact that she met with someone who was killed, who is responsible for the deaths of thousands of his own people. So very interesting response from her.
Let's turn to the Mueller investigation. Paula, the president Tuesday said he submitted written answers to those questions from the Mueller team. What more do we know about this, and what happens now at this point in the investigation?
Well, we know these written questions, they mostly focused on things that happened on the campaign trail. Specifically, they were asking about the infamous 2016 Trump Tower meeting, where the president's son-in-law, and campaign chairman all attended this meeting in the hopes of getting dirt on their opponent, Secretary Clinton, from some Russians. They wanted to know what he knew about that, why he made certain statements calling for Hillary Clinton's emails to be hacked, and whether or not he had any advanced knowledge of email hacks that were eventually released and made public. Going forward, it's possible the special counsel could come back with some additional questions. They may want to pursue the obstruction of justice angle. So far, the president's attorneys have been reluctant to let them go there. And then there's other question about whether or not he'll do an in-person interview. At this point, we just don't know what the special counsel will want to do in addition with the president. We know his attorneys, though, they are likely to put up a fight about any additional questions, and certainly for any in-person interview.
What about this New York Times report Tuesday that said that the president wanted the Department of Justice to investigate Hillary Clinton and James Comey, and that former White House counsel Don McGahn reportedly told the president he did not have the authority to do that? Nancy, let me ask you first. With McGahn gone, is there another voice? Do you get a sense that there are concerns that the president may try to take similar steps in the future? And is there a voice, now that McGahn is no longer there, that would counsel against that?
Well, there's not really any lead lawyer in the White House now. The incoming White House counsel is still undergoing a background check. Don McGahn left in mid-October, so there's sort of no one running the counsel's office. We know from our own reporting that General Kelly, the current chief of staff, usually was aligned with Don McGahn on these issues. But the fact of the matter is that, you know, apart from just the memo that McGahn put out, Trump has said repeatedly to a bunch of advisors that he wants to investigate adversaries like Clinton and Comey. That was something that he said frequently in the White House over the course of 2 years. And so the memo is definitely news that Don McGahn tried to put the brake on it by writing this legal memo. But this has been a theme of the presidency, throughout. And I think it's something that Donald Trump continues to express interest in. I think we've seen repeatedly that he doesn't have a huge appreciation for different branches of the government, be it the judiciary, sort of the separation of power between the White House and the Department of Justice. And I think he's always trying to push those boundaries.
Well, Paula, how does all of this impact the possibility of Mueller issuing a subpoena to the president? And what is the president's legal team saying about that?
They are likely to fight any subpoena, any push to get the president to sit down in person. Now, part of that is that they believe he doesn't have the power to subpoena the president, and part of it's just some good lawyering, trying to keep their client out of a situation where he could potentially be vulnerable if he's dishonest. You can lie to your friends, you can lie to the press, but you can't lie to federal investigators. It's a crime. So we know that would set off a legal battle. It's unclear whether or not Acting Attorney General Whitaker would support any effort by the special counsel to subpoena the president. Every decision the special counsel makes has to go through the person supervising them. That was Rosenstein, now it's Whitaker. It's unclear whether or not he would let that go forward, but it would likely be a legal showdown and something that would be highly likely to wind up at the Supreme Court. So we just don't know what would happen if they push that. We know, though, it would be messy and quite a fight.
All right. Finally, President Trump said Tuesday he is going to a war zone when asked about visiting troops and if he was afraid to go to a war zone. But on Wednesday, Defense Secretary Mattis told reporters there were some places that he advised the president not to visit because of security concerns. Julia, what's your sense on this? How important is it for a commander-in-chief to go and visit the troops?
Yeah, I think it's very important to a lot of Americans that, and including members of the military, that the president go and show his solidarity and support of the troops. It is interesting that we haven't seen President Trump do this sooner. We've seen past presidents do it. It's worth noting that Vice President Pence went on an unannounced trip last year to Kabul, I believe, in December, almost like a surprise Christmas visit to the troops. However, I have talked to some conservatives who would say, and members of the military who would say, well, you know, a presidential visit to the military is a lot. It's a big event. There's a lot of planning that goes into it. So sometimes it's better if the president shows his support in other ways. I've also talked to conservatives who would say they'd like the president to show his support for the military through policy, and that a visit won't matter in the long run. So, you know, it really depends who we're talking to. But I believe a poll you just showed there from The Hill today showed that 88% of Americans say it's very important that the president of the United States visit the troops. So I think that speaks for a lot right there.
All right, given the state of everything in the news, let's all brace for a potential Thanksgiving surprise. We'll see, as the president says. Paula Reid, Nancy Cook, and Julia Manchester, thank you all, and happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you.